meanwhile, Nigerians are to pay more for petrol, and with immediate effect, the ex-depot price is now 151 naira and 56 kobo per litre, with 100. That is from 138 naira 62 in August. That deregulation began in April on the heels of the crash in crude oil prices in the international market. Pump price of premium motor spirit, otherwise known as PMS, was in April reduced from 145 to about 125 naira per litre by the Petroleum Products Pricing Regulatory Agency. Now, in May, the PPPRA announced new pump price bands to between 121 to 123 naira per litre. Now, in July, it went up to a band of 140 to around 143 naira per litre. However, in August, just last month, there was a reduction to 138 naira 62 kobo. Well, joining us to discuss this and more is a professor of legal, social and political environment of business, Olawale Ajai. Thank you very much, and you're welcome to the morning show. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
Ultimately, you're very welcome. Well, ultimately, it doesn't seem as it's been the happiest week for many Nigerian consumers, off the back of hearing lots of different essential resources are being increased. We have petrol, water, and other essential services continuing to go up in price. I'm sure that we'll talk about all of these different things throughout this conversation. But if we were to start with the protests that we had, I'd imagine been expecting with this electricity price hike. It has been described as insensitive by Nigerians. Do you agree that it's reasonable that Nigerians should have to pay more for better access to electricity at this point?
I think it's inevitable. The reforms themselves were predicated on liberalization. The idea was that if we allow the growth of markets and the forces of demand and supply would help to ensure that we have a price that allocates resources much better, recruits services much better, recruits investment much better. I'm not sure that the privatization process was as good as it could be. And what happened from the get-go was that all the inefficiencies of the past were sort of put in the template in terms of pricing for the average consumer. Don't also forget that many people enjoy electricity without adequate metering. Of course, one must also mention that people feel there is hardly any power produced. But I think if we just cast our minds back to what happened with the deregulation in the telecommunications sector and the efficiencies it produced, the services we now enjoy, it probably should be rational basis for saying, let's go along these lines. At that time, I think just about 500,000 people or so could have a line, a telephone line. And we had this minister who said telephones are not for the poor. So that's a mindset. And there was only one telephone provider in town, that was government. But if you remember, when we moved and allowed private players, there was initial hike in terms of prices, but people were just glad to be able to have phones and communicate. And these days, everyone has a phone. The butcher has a phone, the vulcanizer has a phone, and I think we're the better for it because that availability can in fact help to drive economic activity, development. You can use that for education, for telemedicine, whatsoever. And so I think that is probably the way to think. If we can get government out of the picture, we can ensure that we have efficient producers. Of course, there will also be some measure of regulation in terms of making sure that producers are not anti-competitive, are not doing price gouging, are investing in productive resources. So there will always be a regulation, but it will be of a different type rather than holding down what's in our production or subsidies that breed inefficiencies. I think we may have to go this route. The only alternative is to go back to government to produce power, which will not work. We've tried that for how many years has Nigeria been in existence, and it did not work. And so trying to do the same thing over and over that did not work, we're told, is a definition for madness.
Right. I mean, I do agree with you, Professor Olawale, but some analysts are even saying that the federal government should concentrate on, the issue of metering, that they should, meter every electricity consumer, while others are saying that power is not yet cost reflective because it can't, they can't really measure it at this point. What is your take on that?
Well, I do know that unless you pay the producers a price that can, clear their costs and give some profit, you're not doing the best. So I would normally say there's nothing wrong with having cost-reflective tariffs. The idea from the word go was that there will be subsidies for, rural dwellers. There will be subsidies for those who are low-income people. And I think that's what we need to put in place. So a subsidy is a public policy measure to individuals, to business, to aid, whether it's income, social benefits, or whatever it is. It's usually a reverse tax on someone. So every government gives subsidies. The issue is, what are you going to subsidize, and at what level are you going to subsidize? So what I think should be done is, let's go back to the blueprint, and then let's make sure that those who need to be subsidized, get the subsidies. So pro-poor subsidies, which you can target very well, are very okay. And whether it's for the electricity sector or the petroleum sector, I think that's what we should try to ensure, that those who are poor, those who are marginalized, are able to get assistance. And those who should be able to pay can pay. There's another point as well, that we need to raise productivity and efficiency in the overall economy. That itself may expand economic activity, which will redound in more investors coming in, more efficient producers coming in. The competition should normally drive prices down. That is orthodoxy, really, even though you need very sound governmental measures to get those things into place. But I think that is probably the road to take. Let's make sure subsidies are better targeted. And then you can also ensure that people are not wasting resources, particularly for petroleum, which is a wasting resources. So the current generation should not eat up everything, and there's nothing for the coming generation. Even if we're going to use the resources, that's the petroleum resources, we should be, saving into the future, whether it's in terms of technology, development, alternative resources, etc.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you there. It is time for us to take a short break, but please don't worry and don't go anywhere. When we come back, we will continue this discussion. Please do stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We are still joined by Olawale Ajai, who is here to talk to us about the current spate of increased tariffs across the board when it comes to essential services and resources here in Nigeria. Still on the topic of electricity, though, you've got your NERCs, that's the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Committee, and they've recently okayed the tariff hike itself, but they've also said that should only happen once discos consult with consumers first, and that hike won't affect customers who already receive less than 12 hours of electricity per day. In this instance, this is obviously an exemption to those obviously receiving less energy than others. What do you say about that? Do you think that that goes enough to calm the tensions? Does that do enough to answer the questions that people have been asking so far about whether or not this hike is feasible for many Nigerians?
That is fair enough. I suppose there is also the effort to ensure that the discos are disciplined by, or rather that consumers are protected and the discos also have regard to consumers. It's an effort also to assuage public ire over the tariff increases. But I think the truth of the matter is that tariffs have been held low for so long. The discos themselves are not as efficient as they should be. So all along the chain, there are problems. But and if government is now willing to allow NERC to, the independence the legislation gives it, to put in place the necessary measures, well, so be it. I guess that would be helpful, because the truth of the matter is that we're generating 13,000 megawatts, transmitting 7,000. There is a problem, of course, with transmission infrastructure, which remains in government's hands. So it's probably also, a bit of evidence that probably that should not be in government's hands. And the necessary degree of investment, to renew that infrastructure has to be gotten. And the Nigerian government no longer has the revenue to do that. So obviously what you want to try to do is to attract investment. Unfortunately, these are probably the worst of times to be doing this. But the truth is that there probably is no choice. COVID-19, the crash in oil price, the problems, of course, that we have in Nigeria, which is crude oil dependent, means that there really is nowhere to go.
Right.
So I think those are some of the points we really have to bear in mind. Apparently, we will have to find a way to ensure that that transmission infrastructure is refurbished. We'll have to find a way to ensure that the discos are doing whatever they need to do, including metering. And we'll need to find a way to ensure that rural electrification takes place, because the whole economy is really very dependent on having enough power.
Right. Right. You are absolutely right. Everything all really boils down to the efficiency of the discos. Now, I don't know if you got a chance to take a look at the CBN circular dated August 21st, where they asked banks to take over electricity bills from the discos. Analysts are saying that, the directive is ill-timed at this period, but others are saying, should the CBN be a regulatory body for the power sector?
I think the logic has to be that the power sector has benefited from several rounds of subsidy, really, in terms of bailouts. I think that's the word. That would be the more correct word. And the banks have been used to give out these bailouts. In fact, actually, I think the banks were also used to pay for some of the, the privatization. And so if the banks go down, if the financial system goes down, it's going to have devastating impacts upon the entire system. So basically, the idea seems to be that maybe more efficiency in collection, but it also looks to be a bit like some implicit debt collection or something like that.
Indeed. Well, I wonder if we can segue on to different sources of contention in terms of us talking about essential services and people having to pay more for them here in Nigeria. You'll be well aware that in addition to electricity hikes, there have also been the water resource bill, which ultimately focuses on more people having to pay for licenses for boreholes and the like. And then, of course, petrol hikes. Perhaps if we were to start with petrol hikes here, we know that members for the coalition of northern groups have called on, or rather demanded, the federal government immediately reverse this petrol price hike. We've spoken at length at the journey, the going forwards and backwards with raising it, bringing it back down, and now it's gone back up again. They've said that the federal government should reverse that or face prolonged strikes. At this point, which side do you think carries more weight, has more power to make a change, the government or the people and the protests?
I'm not sure the government will have the ability to sustain subsidy payments, or, I think that probably is just the truth. But let's also look at it from a national interest point of view. Should we rather be subsidizing PMS prices and practically the whole of West Africa? Because, petrol costs more across the border, and much of what we're supposed to be, consuming in Nigeria actually goes across the border. So I think we also need to think through these implications and effects. I think sometime earlier in the year, or was it last year, when the borders were shut — I'm really not an advocate for shutting borders indefinitely, but when the borders were shut, we saw a marked decrease in petroleum consumption of maybe about 20 million liters or thereabout, and it was very clear that much of what was supposedly being consumed locally was just going across the borders, maybe even as far as Mali, who knows. So I think these are some of the things we have to bear in mind. Besides, we were buying petrol at 160 something, and hopefully the benefits of deregulation or liberalization is that at some times the prices will drop, at some times the prices will go up. So that hopefully is something that we have to bear in mind. There's also the point about bridging Petroleum Equalization Fund, which is a measure of subsidy. This has to be careful. All of this has to be carefully managed from the social impact point of view. So the idea again has to be: can we remove indiscriminate subsidies and target those who would be helped by subsidies? Can we help the rural poor? Can we help the urban poor? Can we find a way to ensure that the distribution and transportation system is subsidized? And government is talking about compressed natural gas, liquefied natural gas for the stock, public transport stock. If that can be put in effect, and probably we see that public transport is lower in terms of pricing, perhaps that will help to assuage these increases.
Indeed, I think that's a perfect place for us to end. Olawale Ajai, thank you very much for your time here and for your insightful outlook on what has been happening here in Nigeria on this story.